love winning, man. I love winning. You hear what I'm saying? It's like better than losing.
The champ is here! The champ is here! The champ is here! The champ is here!
It's a big, hairy American winning machine. If you ain't first, you're last. You know what I'm talking about?
The champ is here! The champ is here! The champ is here! The champ is here! The champ is here!
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Expanding the Zone. I'm Shayne Combs here with my brother Matt. Once again, this is show 24, and tonight we're looking at something that I think is going to be very interesting to sports fans all across our listening area. We challenge you to really think of your area, think of some of the programs and particular people, leaders that you have a lot of respect for, and see if these characteristics we talk about tonight make a lot of sense to you. And on that note, we're talking common threads amongst all successful high school programs and looking to see some of the characteristics that they all share. And, you know, Matt, I'll just jump right into it because I think we have a great show and I think we have a lot to get to. So let's not really mess around with a lot of the introduction stuff. I feel like a good place to start would be, I think everyone, every school probably at some point can have a really good team, a good basketball team, good volleyball team, good baseball team, good football team. So what is it tonight that you hope to break away from that and really describe what you see as a successful, outstanding program versus that successful, outstanding team?
Yeah, Shayne, I think what we're trying to do tonight is we're really trying to talk about, like you said, those shared characteristics, those common threads, as you said, amongst championship level or highly successful programs. And I think that word programs is key to our discussion tonight because, like you said, I mean, over the course of a decade, 2 decades, almost every school will have its moment in the sun, so to speak, in terms of each of their sports. The football team will put it together one year and have a nice season, or the baseball team, whatever. And those are great. But what we're talking about tonight are the program that over the course of 10, 15, even 20 years wins consistently, plays at a championship level. It doesn't necessarily win the championship every year. I mean, that's probably not going to happen over that length of time. But competes for it, is always sticking their nose in it. You know, it's one of those things like, you go to a tournament and so-and-so made the district tournament again. Well, same old for them. It seems like they're there every year, or they're right. I would tell people as you're listening tonight to kind of imagine whatever league you're most familiar with. Just take the league that you're most familiar with and think in terms of what volleyball program would I say is the best? What basketball program is the best? What football program is the best? And as you think in those terms, think long term. And as we're discussing some of these topics, see if you as a listener don't agree that, that team that I'm thinking about, they have that characteristic. They do that. Because I think a lot of what we're trying to hit on tonight are the things that are shared, like we say, across the board.
Well, Matt, I have to admit my sarcasm a little bit. I always go out and talk to a lot of people, several people I know listen to the show, several people who are not familiar with the show, but I'll really try to get a pulse for, local sports people that wear a lot of different hats. And I have to admit a little bit of the sarcastic remark that comes back right away is talent. And I certainly can't disagree with that. I don't think you would either, but to me, I don't want to say cop out. I don't want to say, because that's a fact. You have to be very talented to win. But what two-part question here? What's your take on quote unquote talent, and what goes into developing that talent, and more of so the overall culture that you're discussing there in your first answer?
Well, the great programs, those programs that are championship level year after year after year, definitely have talent. There's no doubt about that. I mean, there's really two pieces, two things that every great program has to have right out of the gate. And that's, you have to have talent, and you have to have a positive or a successful culture. And we've talked a little bit about culture in the past, but it's basically how you believe and how you behave. That's really, you know, what it is. And it's your true beliefs, it's your true behavior as a group. That's really what your culture is. And you have to have that, and you have to have talent. I mean, there's no doubt about it. I mean, you know, I used to listen to a podcast, or I still listen to a podcast. They haven't done a lot of new stuff lately, but we've talked about it in the past in the Focus 3 podcast with Tim and Brian Kite. And a lot of people around here, because of their work with Ohio State football, they became pretty popular in Ohio. And a lot of people will know their E+R=O stuff and some of the stuff that they're known for. But, you know, in one of his keynote speeches one time, Brian Kite talked about how if you want 10-0 results, he was talking to a football team. If you want 10-0 results, you've got to have 10-0 culture. If you have 10-0 culture, does that guarantee 10-0 results? Well, no, it doesn't. We all know that can be difficult sometimes. Those perfect seasons are rare. But I think it starts with having that championship culture, that championship belief. But you also have to have the talent. And let's face it, I think sometimes we use talent as we just hope it falls out of the sky and well, I had talent that year, or we didn't have talent that year. I think the championship programs we're going to talk about tonight, Shayne, figure out a way to acquire that talent. They either develop it. I mean, if you're talking about a college team, they go out and recruit it, right? I mean, that's the lifeblood of a college program is recruiting. It doesn't matter if you're the best X and O coach in the world at the college level. If you can't recruit, you're done. That's the lifeblood of your program. The lifeblood of a high school program is developing talent, because unless you're in a certain situation at a private school, or and we've talked about that in the past, you're not going to be able to go out and just recruit whoever you want all the time. So you've got to develop that talent from maybe the 4th, 5th grade on up, right? The youth program, the junior high program, so that you have that talent year after year after year. And that when you graduate some key guys, think about this. I said it being the show, think about that team or those teams in your area, their championship. You ever notice when they graduate people, there's somebody else sort of waiting their turn? You know, even if, man, they got hit hard by graduation, maybe the next year they're not a championship team, but they still win more than they lose. They're still a successful team. And then the year after that, they win a little bit more. And then all of a sudden, they're winning championships again, right? Because that's what the great programs do. They figure out a way to reload, to bring some more talent through. And guess what never changes? Their culture, right? The culture doesn't change. You do things a certain way, and you try your best to develop that talent year after year after year. And I think that's the number one common thread, Shayne, that you'll get out of all these programs that we're referring to tonight is they figure out a way to keep the talent coming, and they have great culture.
It's really good stuff. And it kind of makes me think of a golf analogy of, you know, a lot of times we'll talk about what really establishes how good a golfer you're going to be is how good is your worst day. You know, but
Right.
We'll talk about that a lot. You know, I know as a bogey golfer, I'll go out and I can have one of those stretches where I'm more than capable of playing a 4 or 5 hole stretch, maybe even at even par or so forth. But then what will happen is when it goes bad, unfortunately, my talent level allows it to go really, really bad.
Right.
And I think as I listen to you, that golf analogy comes to my mind because as these programs, Matt, are hit by graduation, you know, some of the cliches you hear are the ability to reload instead of rebuild. You know,
Right.
I think one thing that comes to my mind when we talk about these championship programs, the word rebuild doesn't really fit, does it?
No, not really. I mean,
It is kind of a
doesn't.
reload. Again, it doesn't mean to reload to fire right away. It means to reload to, you know, get back there much, much quicker than the next person can. And I think what happens is, I think you touched on it, I think the culture and the foundation develops that talent, not necessarily from sophomore to junior year for that person to be waiting their turn. It kind of starts down into that 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th grade as well. So don't you feel like that culture leads us into a next point? And it's almost a common sense one that I think everybody would think of pretty early in their list of things, which is that coaching stability. Do you feel like the coaching stability, again, is common sense that's important, but don't you think that has a lot to do with an expectation and a foundation of, hey, here's that culture. Here's the way we believe you should go about it. And that kind of lends itself over a 2, 3, 4, 5 year period for people to kind of know, hey, this is what I got to do. This is what I got to do. Okay, now it's my turn. Here I go. Do you follow what I'm saying there in terms of that analogy and how that probably really locks into the stability of the head coach and the leader of the program?
Yeah, no question. I was on a committee where we were interviewing some football coaches a few years ago, and somebody said something that was really a wise statement. It was a person that didn't have a big time sports background, but they were just commenting on our situation, and they said, I'm not 100% sure what the recipe is for success, but I do know the recipe for failure is having a new coach every 2 years, and let's be real honest. I thought it was a great statement. I mean, these programs that go through coaching changes every couple of years, there's just no chance that becomes a good program. Again, could you catch lightning in a bottle and have a good team? Yes, you could do that. You could have a good season. But in terms of a program, there has to be some stability. Again, think about those programs in your area that are great year after year after year. I guarantee you, in most cases, they've had the same coach for a while. Or here's another thing that you see, Shayne. If it's a type of school that, you see this sometimes at a small school where maybe they have a hard time once a coach has success holding on to them. Maybe coaches move on to what they consider greener pastures or whatever. You ever notice this? Those programs oftentimes have assistants waiting in the wings to take that job, almost like a small market baseball team, right? You're going to lose somebody to free agency after a while, and you hope that you've developed the next one. And they almost hire within the family sometimes, right? They hire from within.
Right.
So a lot of times it's not just they've had the same coach for 20 years. Maybe they've had 3 coaches in 20 years, which is still decent, right? One every 7 years. But they've all 3 kind of come off each other. Like, one was an assistant for one, and the next was the assistant for that person. So you've kind of kept the program the same to where, yeah, we have a new coach this year, fellas, but practice is going to look the same. Our playbook's going to look similar. Our culture is going to look similar. So the kids don't have to make those adjustments. But no, there's no doubt. I mean, that coaching stability, I think, is a huge piece. And I think, that could lead in, I know, Shayne, and I know we'll talk about some of this, that could lead into different discussions, right, about, who's responsible for making sure you hold on to coaches. I mean, what can a school do to do that? What can a community do to that? But yeah, no question that when you look at these programs we're talking about tonight, one of the common threads is familiar faces in that head coaching position. They hold on to their coaches.
Well, that's an interesting point too. And this kind of brings me to a point where I know we always try to correlate our topics to different things at different levels of sports. And I have to ask you, as someone who's been extremely successful, 20 plus seasons at it now, and pretty much winning seasons there for 2 decades. And you played some role of ADs, but you've had ADs, you've had principals, you had superintendents. So if I was going to use an analogy, Matt, I might just throw this at you kind of for fun, for fans to think about. This is a time of year with the NFL just starting up, and where you'll see a lot of these power rankings. And I heard someone the other day say one of the key formulas they use for power rankings is they'll talk. You got to be good at owner, got to be good at general manager, got to be good at head coach, got to be good at quarterback. So I correlated that to kind of a Board of Education superintendent, somewhat of an athletic director, a head coach, and then maybe some of your oldest, best players, depending on the sport, maybe a particular position or whatnot. And my question for you is, how much are you buying into that in terms of what we're talking about at the high school level? Because I think that's something that I get a lot, particularly at the small schools. And I guess I think it's something important to address here, to figure out what applies and what doesn't apply to what we're talking about here tonight. What are you buying? What are you kind of selling there in terms of that analogy in terms of the high school level?
Yeah, I think all those things you just mentioned, or all those positions you just mentioned, I think there's no question it can have an effect indirectly on things. For instance, we just talked about coaching stability, right? Holding on to your coach. Well, let's face it, the relationship that coach has with administration certainly goes a long way into whether he or she wants to stay at that school for an extended period of time.
Sure. Yeah.
I always tell people, it's not real hard to figure out, and I don't want to get off on a different topic, but I'll mention this real quick. It's not real hard to figure out, Shayne, which schools, make it attractive or make it a good work environment for their coaches. Because all you got to really do is look and say, how long do those coaches stay at that school? If you see a school where the football coach has been there 15 years and the basketball coach has been there 10 years, the baseball coach has been there 17 years, guess what? That must be a pretty good place to work. Otherwise, those coaches would have went elsewhere or they would have been fired. I mean, it works both ways. But if those coaches are there an extended period of time, it must be a pretty positive place to work, right? So I guess to answer your question, indirectly, could it affect what we're talking about tonight? Yes, from the coaching standpoint. But I'm going to be honest with you. As I imagine in my head, I even jotted down on paper today, what's the best volleyball program I know of around our area? What's the best football, best basketball, best baseball? And as I started going through those things, some of those schools have dynamic ADs. Some of those schools have a different AD every year, seems like. Some of those schools have superintendents that love sports. Some of them have superintendents who care less about sports. So I don't know. Yeah. I just don't know, Shayne, if I would call it a common thread. You see what I'm saying? I get it. Yeah. I mean, I think, again, it could indirectly affect it, but I'm not sure that I'll go as far to say it's like a common thread of a successful program.
Well, and the reason I wanted to bring that up so early in the show, Matt, is I think I was just in a DLT meeting at our school the other day where I was serving on the committee, and I think where we're guilty sometimes in leadership is we want to check the compliance boxes, right? They'll ask us, hey, does your school do this? And instead of just being honest and saying, no, we don't, we need to be better, what we'll do is we'll almost say, well, every March on this Saturday, we do this. Yeah, we kind of do that. Well, in reality, no, not really. You see what I'm saying? It's not, we don't truly do it. So the point I'm making there is I do think it's important. I do think those relationships are important. We've talked about that for almost 20 shows now. I think those relationships are very, very important to success, but I don't think they can be the end all. And I don't think they can. Here's the thing. It's going to rub people the wrong way. They can't be excuses. Right. You know what I'm saying? At the end of the day, if you have things in place and you're the head coach and your coaches are going to battle with your kids every day and you're setting that culture, you can't allow those other things to be excuses that hold you back or almost, sit out there as kind of a reason. Well, that's kind of why we're not being successful. I think you got to look in the mirror and approach things a little bit more of a competitive edge. So I think that's well said. I think you and I are probably closer than maybe I originally thought we would be on that particular answer. Let me go this way. I'm going to set up with what I think is a pretty basic question, and then when you're done answering, Matt, I'm going to follow up with what I think is a real dynamic question that people really need to hear you answer. So let me start with the simple one. Once all this is in place, what about connection with the overall adult staff, the overall student body, the overall community? How important is that dynamic in terms of feeling like your program is one that has great pride, one that represents community, one that represents school, and kind of is considered, because these types of programs I think of, Matt, are kind of the face of their high schools if you think about it. And I don't know if that's me being extreme or not, but that's kind of the way I look at it. What do you feel about the relationship in terms of the role that those particular people play?
I do think this would be one that I would probably say is a common thread of these great programs from this standpoint. The programs that I think of tonight, they're programs that their community really gets behind. One, I mean, obviously because of their success, but I think also it's because of the relationship built, between the players in the community, the coach in the community. We always tell our guys, try to be easy to root for, right? Because I've had a couple teams win league championships that the community got behind. They were excited, but maybe didn't quite get behind the same as another team. You know, I've had other teams that you couldn't find an empty seat in the house, and they couldn't get enough of. And I think maybe that's just, there are some teams that maybe don't have that personality. They don't connect with the community the same. But I think as a whole, championship level programs do a pretty consistent job of making sure you have that connection, right? Whether it be in your fundraising. I mean, like, I'll give you an example. One of the basketball programs that came to my mind tonight when I said to myself, what's some of the best programs you know of? I played in their golf outing this year. I'm not going to name them by name, but they're coached by somebody who I think, quite frankly, is the best basketball coach I've ever been around at the high school level. He's just that good. And I played in their golf outing this year, and it was so, the amount of teams were so many, it was so big that they had to make extra tee times, like in the morning. It was supposed to be like a 1 o'clock start. They had to throw some people on in the morning. Why? Well, I feel like they've got the type of program people want to be a part of. Even business people in the community, hey, let's get a team and go play in so-and-so's golf outing this weekend, right? They want to be a part of that. They want to be around it because, again, great leaders attract, okay? And I think championship programs they attract people to them. So yeah, Shayne, I think that would be a common thread in terms of the program relationship with the community. You said staff, same thing. How many times have you seen those championship programs? They do it right in the classroom too, right? Mm-hmm. Where
easy to root for.
The teachers come and watch them. Yeah. You know what I mean? I've had teams where I'll look up in the stands and say, well, Mr. So-and-so's here tonight. I didn't know he comes to basketball games. Well, he come to a basketball game that night because he had a connection with those kids on that team, right? And there's probably some years that they don't. But I think as a whole, the common thread theme again is, yeah, they connect with their faculty, with their community, and it's something that the school can really get behind and be proud of.
Well, you started to, I think, lay the foundation of the answer to this next question. It's one I've been wanting to ask you all day, and I purposely didn't tell you this one before we went on the air because I just think it fits perfectly here. With everything we're talking about, is winning enough?
In terms of
just in terms of being viewed, like you just let me maybe rephrase, because again, I'm throwing that's at you the first time. When you think of those teams you have down on that paper right there in front of you,
right? They
obviously win. They wouldn't be on your paper if they didn't win. They win a lot.
They win
even when they're quote unquote down. You've already stated, and I agree with you. The same ones I have 7 programs down here on my paper, and believe me, in the last 2 decades they win. A lot of them I've had to be on the other side of it. My point is they obviously win, but in terms of really finding your way on this type of list and having this type of impact and being viewed by your peers and by so many different people involved, is winning simply enough, or does it have to go to a whole nother level?
It's kind of like what comes first, right? The chicken or the egg, because to me, I would say on the surface, no, winning by itself wouldn't be enough. But guess what? You're not winning over the course of 20 years if you don't do these things we're talking about. You see what I'm saying? I don't think if you've got kids, this goes to the culture piece, right? We talked about the talent, but this goes to the culture piece. If your culture is such where your kids act like jackwagons in the classroom every single day, and they don't do things right, and the community can't get behind them, and no one wants to play, you're not going to win, because those types of kids don't win consistently. That type of culture doesn't win consistently. Does that make sense? Sure. So if your culture is broken and you're not doing things the right way off the court, you may have a winning team, right? There's probably been good seasons with kids not doing things right off the court. But I don't think you can win over the course of the long haul that way. It'll catch up with you eventually, Shayne. So I guess that's the way I would answer that, is I don't even think you can win long term without doing some of those things we just talked about.
You know, Matt, I think too that sometimes we paint this picture of everything's sunshine and puppies when it comes to
Right.
these types of programs. You know what I mean? It's all like,
It's like utopia, right? It's like,
yeah, go play a game, yay, we win, celebrate, do it again. It's not always that easy. You go through difficult times. I know to put a little teaser out there, we're in the middle of doing a really neat piece on one of the great teams of all time in our area here in Chillicothe, Ohio, and looking back on that particular season that we're going to document, there was some rough times, right? There was adversity,
Right.
there was difficult things that they had to go through as coaches, as teammates, and even somewhat within the community. And that leads me to a point of two things. One, when you come up on hard times, it really tests that relationship, kind of like in a marriage or any friendship or anything. Same thing can kind of happen, not only in your personal life, but in this team concept. So on one point, I want to look at the stability of relationships within that program. But two, I want to then carry that into how well they handle adversity. So talk to me about those things in terms of the role that these strong relationships play when it comes time, because it's going to happen. You know what I'm saying? It even in a year where you go 20-2 or 21-1, 22, you're going to have a kid get sick. You're going to have injuries. You're going to have tough times. Someone's going to have some illness in their family.
Right.
All sorts of things are going to hit. Talk to me about that stability and relationship, and the importance of being able to handle adversity in order to consistently be successful.
Well, I'll say this. Don't you feel like, Shayne, that the teams we're talking about tonight, these programs, one of the common threads is they just handle adversity way better than average programs do.
There's no question.
And whether it's
you think, oh, there's no way they'll survive that this week or whatever, and then they go 2-0. You know what I mean?
Yeah, right. Like you'll say, oh gosh, did you see how they lost the other night? How can you even come back from that? Well, I mean, and we've all had those thoughts, right?
Oh, yeah.
But the great programs figure a way to come back from that. They answer it. I mean, whether it's minor adversity, like, hey, we've had 3 straight turnovers and coach had to call timeout, all the way up to the major stuff, like you're talking about an injury, which cost you one of your best players, or, whatever the case may be. Those championship level teams, the one thing they do is just they bounce back from adversity. They get to the next play. It's that next play mentality. They just handle hard times better than other teams, other programs. I mean, like you've even seen it. If you've coached in the same program, which you have for a number of years, we've had great teams. We've had not so good teams. And your not so good teams, one of the things they probably do, at least in my case, is those teams don't handle adversity real well. Like they get their head down easy. They come over to the bench. Oh, here we go again, type of thing. Where your great teams come over to the bench and say, we're not having this. Let's get it straightened out. Let's do this. Let's do this. So the great programs, they just happen to do that over a longer period of time. Does that make sense? They basically do what the good teams do, but they do it over 10, 15, 20 years consistently, where they just get on to the next thing. They just handle that adversity. And I think it's a culture thing of, we're not going to make excuses. We're not going to, just sit around and complain about it. We're going to get on to the next thing. We're going to figure out a way to fix it. And that's just something I see as I look at these teams, like you say, that I had on my list tonight. That's something they do. They bounce. There's this uncanny ability almost just to bounce back, just to get going to the next thing.
Well, Matt, I know you have a slide that's going to touch on adversity a little bit. While you're setting that up, it'd be a good time for me to tell our listeners, if you're out there listening on your podcast app, thank you so much. We're out there on Buzzsprout, iHeart, Spotify, iTunes, all the way across the board. But on YouTube, SVC Sports Zone Shayne, our YouTube channel, we'll, a lot of times, just like tonight, we'll be putting up some different things or whatever. So you get an opportunity just to get a little bit of a different thing, a little bit of ability to watch the show instead of just listen. Same way if you're on YouTube, thank you. Know that anytime you can't get to us on YouTube, you can always go the other route and get us on the podcast app. So just a good time to throw that in there, Matt. But I'll go ahead and let you put this up there and set it up for us. Go ahead.
Well, yeah, because this is going to talk a little bit about what you mentioned. I didn't just forget what you said about the relationship piece, Shayne.
Okay.
I think this slide will lead into that a little bit. Let me say first what this was. Okay, I mean, it's funny, like, just you never know when something's going to catch your eye as a coach. I'm sitting in church a couple weeks ago, and our pastor is also a girls basketball coach. So I'd actually said this to him later. I was like, that slide you put up today, that could go with coaching too, and he kind of, you might be right. So what this slide was intended for at church was basically the 4 levels or the 4 things that have to happen for you to reach your spiritual maturity, right? Your maturity in your faith. Well, like I said, when I looked at this slide, and here it is, Shayne, if you can see it on there, and hopefully the people on YouTube can see it.
Yeah.
When you look at this, I thought this maturity we're talking about here really could be used in athletics as well, and with your team. I almost think, because one of the common threads, Shayne, that I had in my notes before I even saw this slide, believe it or not, was the championship level programs all have a certain level of maturity, don't you think? It's not, and I'm not talking about mature, because look, I've had great teams that were goofy as all get out, right? I'm not talking about maturity. I'm not talking about maturity as in, we're business 100% of the time. I mean, no,
Right.
I mean, we're dealing with kids, I think it should be a part of, I think championship level programs have a culture of fun. I think it's fun to play in those programs. So I'm not going to sit here and say that it's just business all the time. The maturity, when I see the word maturity, Shayne, what it means to me, though, is more of a competitive maturity. It's more of a way of doing things consistently, right? At a consistent high level, and understanding when it's go time, understanding when, hey, we've got to really focus in on these things right now. That's the maturity I'm talking about. And as I look at these 4 things right here.
And read them first, Matt, for people that are on the podcast that can't see.
Yeah. So I'll read all 4 at first. We'll come back to them. There's unity. There's speaking truth in love. That's number 2. Doing your part, number 3. And number 4, shifting from me to we. All right. So, man, when I see these things, it's like the absolute list, the complete list of what it takes to be a mature championship level program. If you think about it, these programs we're talking about, Shayne, there's definitely a unity. I mean, you can see it. Go watch warm-ups. I always tell people this: watch warm-ups in whatever sport it is. And if you have the ability to watch a practice, it's even better. But just watch warm-ups. Championship level programs, they look different in warm-ups, I think, Shayne.
No question.
Teams that
no question. Yeah.
They just, and even like if you come before practice, the best teams I've ever coached, if you go out there before practice, they're practicing before practice. Those kids are getting certain shots in. They're working on their free throws. Maybe they're stretching a little extra that night because they've had an injury. Whatever. I mean, they're not just goofing off. They're doing something before practice. Now, they'll have their moments where they want to have fun, whatever. But for the most
you're
part,
right. The best shooters are the ones out there shooting. The best hitters are the ones on the tee down there getting extra cuts.
Yeah, they're working a sweat up before practice starts. They're not sitting in the corner with their headphones on until coach blows the whistle. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And the same way with warm-ups. You see these teams in warm-ups that, man, they're just clicking. They're moving. They're working together. They're talking. There's a unity. How about communication on the floor? I mean, that's or on the field or the floor, whatever the sport is, that goes with unity. Don't you think championship level programs communicate with each other better than ones that don't? So before I go on to the next one, Shayne, do you have anything to add on, I guess, just the unity part?
No, I love what you said about the warm-ups, because the word I had in my notes here that I think fits right now is procedures. They're not just they're not one of these people, Matt, that like hey, we've got our first game tomorrow night. We better put in a pregame. You know what I'm saying? Like
Right.
there's a
Yeah,
purpose.
yeah.
There's a purpose of here's what we're going to do. Here's why we're going to do it. Here's what we're trying to accomplish. You know, and then we're going to go to this thing, and this is what we're trying to accomplish, and so forth. So I think that's really well said. Procedures and purpose are two words that really come to my mind in terms of unity and how they do it together, and they do it for a certain reason.
Number two, Shayne, speaking truth and love. Now, we've talked about this is where that relationship piece comes in. You're talking about, okay, and that's why I purposely kind of waited on it for a minute. But like the best program, those championship programs, man, they're honest with each other. You know, there's a truth always being spoken, either from coach to player, right? And that sometimes is rough. That's brutal honesty sometimes, correct? But also player to player. You know, the best programs are the ones that you have a team meeting, players speak up, players talk to each other. Hey, listen, you know, you need to do this better, and they're not afraid to say those things to each other. Why? Because those relationships have been formed. You and I have talked about this before on this show, Shayne. When those relationships come first, you can be brutally honest with somebody, because now that person across from you knows you care about them. Right? They know that, hey, man, he's not just calling me out. He wants me to get better. Or she's not making fun of me. She wants this team to get better, right? And so when those relationships come first, it allows you to speak truthfully to each other, to give constructive criticism. It allows the coach to maybe be harder on a player, right? Because that coach has developed that relationship with that kid. I think the championship level programs, the one thing about them, and I'm not in everybody's locker room, but I'd almost bet you money if you interviewed these coaches we have on this paper you talked about, Shayne, if you interviewed each of these coaches and say, hey, what's a team meeting look like? What's a practice look like? Do your players call each other out when they're not giving good effort? I bet you almost across the board they do.
Well, I think that's spot on, and I don't want to jump too far ahead of you, Matt, and take your list here, but to me, number three, in terms of doing your part, I always talk about, you know, leadership of demand it of yourself first and then go demand it of others, right? I kind of must look at that backwards from a standpoint of, you know, do your job, do your part. And then once you do that, it's a lot easier to go. If you're going to go get some extra work in this afternoon, don't go alone. You know what I mean? Take someone with you. It just, to me, those types of things don't carry weight when someone's there saying, you know, you're late to practice, or your grades are killing us, or, you know, you're not. That doesn't fly at all if you're late to practice, or you're not a very good student yourself.
Right.
You're a C student. So to me, accountability is another word. So yeah, I've talked procedure there. I've talked, you know, with a purpose. Accountability really becomes a big factor there, first individually and then collectively.
Yeah, no question. And I think when I see doing your part as number three, one thing that jumps to mind, Shayne, is those championship level teams and programs. They have players that play their role, right? I mean, they do, you know, they accept their role. Now, like you said, that may not just be on the court or on the field. You just mentioned that your role might be as a leader to take people with you, right? Your role might be, hey, I'm a leader of this team and I've got a great work ethic, but I've got to get somebody else to go with me and have a great work ethic. That might be doing your part. Doing your part might be, hey, I'm the 10th guy and I'm never getting in the game hardly, but I'm going to practice great every day. I'm going to be a great teammate. I'm going to do whatever I can do to be a part of this organization, to be a part of this program. Do you ever notice the best programs have those kids who, you know, maybe it's a football team and you only get to play special teams, but by golly, I want to be on this team playing special teams, right? Maybe it's that baseball team where the guy's only pinch running. But man, I want to be the best pinch runner in the league, because maybe my team can go to the state tournament or regional tournament, right? I want to be a part of this great program. Again, I think greatness attracts. So when you have a great program, kids want to be a part of it, even if it means accepting their role.
Well, I don't think there's any question. I think, Matt, appreciation from your peers is a really, really big deal. I don't always know that it's about a headline in the newspaper or on the website or whatever. I think a lot of times what sells those roles is appreciation throughout the locker room, throughout the team. You know, what the offensive lineman really wants to know is that his quarterback and running back appreciate him. What the setter really wants to know is that her hitter appreciates her. You know what I mean? It's one of the what the libero wants to know is, man, my team appreciates the effort I give in terms of diving out here and sacrificing myself to do this, this, and this. You know, so
didn't you tell me, Shayne, not to interrupt you, didn't you give me an example of a year or two ago, the school that you're at, the quarterback would cook breakfast for the lineman?
Oh, he really did. It was one of the most impressive things I'd ever seen.
And that goes with that goes with number 3 on this list, right? Doing your part. He's doing whatever he can do,
right?
And in addition to being the quarterback, obviously, to help his team.
No, but he really did. He would come in basically like 6:30 in the morning before and back, you know, it's not like, you know, you're just making a waffle apiece. I mean, the lineman can eat a little bit, right? That's what it's, you know, in all seriousness, he'd be in there and he'd have his chef cap on or whatever, and he'd be cooking it up or whatever. And I'm just sitting there thinking, and I had the privilege of coaching this young man for 4 years. Well, actually, I was kind of cheated out of the 4th year, but we still got to start together the 4th year. But it was an outstanding example of exactly what you're talking about in terms of, I don't think it's always about, I think some people do get wrapped up in stat sheets and different things or whatever. I don't think it's about that at all. I don't always think it's about headline. I think it's about being appreciated by the guy to your left or that girl to your right, that teammate, right? In terms of, you know, man, he or she brings this to the team. He or she brings this to the team. I'm going to bring this to the team. And at the end of the day, we're all trying to accomplish the same thing. And that's what really makes sports really cool, when these championship cultures we're talking about tonight seem to do it better than most.
Yeah. And as you go down this list, Shayne, to number 4, shifting from me to we, I mean, this is just absolutely crucial in championship programs. And it's something that you definitely see, you know, as a common thread, Shayne, from great program to great program is this unselfishness, really, right? That's what we're talking about. I mean, it's putting the team before you. You know, I always tell our guys, you know, we only have 2 signs up in our whole basketball locker room. And there's one that says, there's one that speaks to consistency, which basically says it's easy to be good occasionally. What's tough is being good every day, because we want to be consistent. But the other one is surrender me for we, because we want to be unselfish. And I think the unselfishness is something you will find 100% of the time across the board in great programs. Now, when I say 100% of the time, does that mean they never have a selfish moment? No, we're human. But I'm saying, when you take these programs we're talking about tonight as a whole, they're way more unselfish than they are selfish in those locker rooms, or they wouldn't have the success that they have year after year after year.
Well, no, I don't think there's any question. I think, again, what makes great teams, as we said earlier, is talent. Well, if you're a talented person, you obviously have an incredible work ethic. And I think what happens is, does that mean that you don't have individual goals? Well, sure you do. You might want to shoot a certain percentage. You might have a rebounding goal. You might have in soccer, hey, I want to score this many goals this year or whatever. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think that drives you. I think when it comes time to compete, I think, like you said, those things get put to the back burner, and it's about having more on the scoreboard at the end of that particular competition, right? And I think a common thread on just about every one of these teams on my list here that I look at, how many times you find yourself saying this, Matt? Can you imagine if he or she played on this other team? Man, that kid right there only hits in the front row for this team. She'd play all the way around on that volleyball team. Hey, this kid right here plays like left field and hits 8-hole. He'd hit like leadoff on 3 teams in our league.
It's that accepting your role, really.
It is. On
that list, do your part, and then going from me to we, they sort of work together? Because, I mean, part of that role acceptance comes from unselfishness.
No question. You get that kid at these programs that all of a sudden they step up their senior year and they're a 1,000-yard rusher. And you're like, oh my goodness, where's this kid been? Well, he was sitting behind the previous two 1,000-yard rushers. You know what I'm saying? Like, one of the programs that jumps out to me, I'll never forget a coach one. This has been almost like 8-9 years ago. He was stepping up to put his particular player up for the Mizuno All Ohio game, back is what it was called then, and
right.
And these people that were up there, I mean, it's an impressive list every year in our area. It really is.
Oh, yeah.
And they were putting some seniors up there, and you know, you had some kids that had some phenomenal, Matt, just career numbers. And he said, well, you know, his career numbers aren't quite as good because his freshman and sophomore year, he was playing some JV catcher because the catcher that we went on to play Division I college baseball.
Yeah. And you're thinking to yourself, how many teams would that kid not be playing JV?
Yeah, I'm guessing we might have found a spot for him in the top 9. You know what I mean? It's one of those where, but in all seriousness, what happens is, you know, that culture, those kids come up, and can you imagine in so many programs that aren't established, what happens? There's almost an entitlement as freshman or sophomore. Man, I'm a good player. I should get to do this, or this. Right. And in those programs, it's kind of already set of, hey, here's where you're at right now. We want to get you to here, and then we want to get you to here, and then that's how our culture works. And I just think it's a fascinating example, and it's fascinating to see those characteristics. So I thought that was a great list. I appreciate you sharing that. I certainly thought it applied. Now, Matt, I just want to kind of rattle off a couple things here that I don't know how much. I think part of the show, as I said earlier, I not only want to give the absolutes, I also want to kind of throw out some things that sometimes are maybe misconceptions, and I just wanted to get your take on them. Right. What if I just say, I'll just kind of go one at a time. What if I say facilities? Factor?
I wouldn't say it's a common thread, just because you know, I like the volleyball team I have written down on my list here. That's one of the best I've known in the last 20 years. There was a time where they had one of the worst gyms in their league. And all they did was like win the league championship every year. So I don't know. You see what I'm saying? I don't know that necessarily is a common thread. Do I think it's a factor? It's like anything else. The better facilities you have, the better uniforms you have, the better stuff you have. You know, Shayne, does it make your program feel more special? I think it probably does. Does it get kids more excited? It probably does. So I think it can be a factor. I just wouldn't go as far to say it's a common thread, just because there's programs that don't have those things that still get it done.
I think that probably even goes into some other things. You mentioned equipment, you mentioned uniforms, you mentioned all of those.
Yeah, because take those things right there, Shayne, like uniforms, equipment, even your facilities. Sometimes once you establish a championship program, those things improve, because all of a sudden now people, like we mentioned earlier, your fundraising gets better. People want to be a part of it. Yeah. All of a sudden there's a little more money there. Mm-hmm. You can get your kids some nicer stuff. But let's get our guys some travel gear. Let's get our girls new uniforms this year, right? Let's dress up our gym a little bit. Let's get some new scoreboards. Let's do, whatever it is. Sometimes, Shayne, it's like the success comes first, and that leads to some of those other things.
Well, Matt, I'm going to tell you what, I've got some things down here for final thoughts. That clears off my show agenda. As always, I don't want to cut you off there. Is there anything else that we need to touch on before we would go into our final thoughts segment?
Well, not a ton, Shayne. I had down, one of the things I had down I wanted to get your thoughts on. Yeah. And we always say, we're not lying. We don't always give each other everything before the show, because we want there to be some, just some spontaneous discussion here. We think that makes for probably a better discussion. So I didn't really hit you with these pre-show, but I feel like one of the common threads, we already mentioned sort of the attention to detail. I had that down as one, but I think we sort of mentioned that in that when we started talking about the unity and like how teams warm up, how they prepare, the little things, right? I feel like the championship programs don't view little things as little things. You know, they do them because they understand they're important. I don't know if you want to comment on that at all, but I feel like we touched on it a little bit, but I really feel that attention to detail.
I think the championship coaches that I've been around and have constantly tried to steal from, they have the unique ability, Matt, to identify those details that are important. You know what I mean? Like if you're not careful, there is another side to that. If you're not careful, you can sit there and waste 15, 20, 25 minutes of practice 3 nights a week on things that maybe aren't really that big a deal. Or like I've heard you say on other shows, right? Pick your battles. I've heard you say like, hey, that's not really that big a deal. You know, but I think the reason, you've heard me use the word proactive before. I think the reason the championship coaches don't really fall into that is they have the unique ability to, again, they're not deciding on Thursday night, hey, tomorrow there, Friday, we got their game. We might want to try to put something in for this or that, right? There's kind of a planted place. They have the unique ability to identify. In the classroom, we call it, you know, backward design. You know, I don't teach Monday through Thursday, sit down Thursday night at my computer and type a test. Right. You know what I'm saying? I type a test like last week.
Yeah.
And I say, here's what I want my students to learn. And then I start planning all week long to prepare them to be successful on that test on Friday. You follow me? So, I mean, it's
well, yeah, because it's almost like I do the same thing with, I don't know how you handle your practice plans, but I sort of do the same thing. Like in the month of November, which is our preseason for basketball, I always start with, here's where I want to be at the end of November. I want to have this, and then I go to a weekly practice plan and then to a daily practice plan. So you're sort of, like you said, you're working from big to small.
Yeah, there's no question. So again, I think great leaders, great coaches have the unique ability to identify those things early on, and that's how they avoid, you know, not wasting their time. You know, the one point I had down here leading into final thoughts is, again, what matters, what doesn't matter. I think that's really, really important throughout the show. And as I've gone down through my list, I've made those factors that we agree really, really matter. We have the things that could matter, and then we have those things that don't matter. And what I find is you've got to have those foundation pieces. I call them our absolutes. There's things we do in practice every single day because we feel like they're that important. We feel like those are the absolutes that we have to do. And I'll share kind of where I ended up getting those things from, Matt. We talked throughout the show about having those relationships throughout the community and so forth. And it's funny how all of this comes together, because in a community as small as the one I coach in, it's important for us to be a part of our community's culture. You know what I mean? Because like I'm a baseball coach of 20 years. The foundation of our program is the Little League program in town. You see what I'm saying? Like that's the fabric of who we are.
That's how you acquire that talent.
That talent, right. And that's how we acquire that culture. You know what I mean? And so my relationship and my appreciation that I must show constantly for the men and women who work up there and put these kids in these situations to be successful and to learn the game, but beyond learning the game, learning how to, again, handle themselves as athletes and come to practice and what it means to be on a team and all those different things. That's crucial. That's so crucial. Then as I move up into the high school level and I'm looking at things, I would challenge coaches, get rid of your ego, man. Like, you know, I feel like I've been blessed where I'm at. I wouldn't trade it for the world. And I feel like we've had, you know, situations where we've threatened to become one of these programs you're describing. We haven't quite been able to get there over and over and over, but we've certainly been a very respectable program. But I'll tell you this, I am constantly evaluating these programs and I'm constantly stealing. I can remember being a young coach, Matt, and you talked about warming up.
Right.
I can't go to a game still to this day without watching a team warm up and just stealing. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, I like that. Man, I don't like that. What are they doing? You know what I mean? I like that. You know, and it's just honest feedback. You know what I mean? And it's one of those things where I'm constantly trying to look. You mentioned practices. I try to jump into a practice anytime I can. I think all of those things are so important And if you, during this show tonight, have been able to write down, if you're kind of in business and you've put down 3 or 4 businesses on your paper, if you're in high school sports and you have that list of 5 or 6 programs, what I would challenge you is get out and watch those programs and steal from them. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
you know, how do they do this? How do they do that? And if you don't do it that way, you might want to look at doing it. You know what I mean? Like, because I know I'm the first to admit that, you know, I've just swallowed my pride before, and I've went and I've sat down and again we talked about coaches. Was that last week, Matt, when we talked about why coaches quit? And we talked about mentoring coaches. And I've just reached out to coaches. I got to be coach. I just respect the heck out of how you guys, you know, call your pitches and defend the middle infield or whatever. What is it you do? You guys look like you're on, and I steal from them. You know what I mean? And I'll be like, if we didn't get better at that in the next 2 or 3 years, you know, same way in basketball. Hey, you know, I had a young coach reach out to me about 2 years ago and say, man, we just are absolutely awful in the first 4 minutes. We're a 15-4 JV basketball team. We're a good team, but man, we're struggling down the stretch here. And I had learned from other coaches at an earlier age, and the very thing you're talking about. Well, pay attention to how you warm up. You might take a look at this. What's your pregame like? Maybe practice, maybe throw into practice a little bit more of your pregame and how you're going to play that first 3 or 4 minutes the night before in practice and so forth. So those are some of the things, again, that you learn through experience, but you can only learn through experience if you're willing to take your ego, put it to the side, and be willing to constantly be a learner. You know what I mean? Yes. I'm still amazed 20 plus years into teaching, 20 plus years into coaching multiple sports, how much I'm learning every single day. And that's a real big factor, I think, in terms of trying to get the group you're leading onto a list like this.
Yeah, you know, as I sat there and listened to you talk, Shayne, it really comes down to the ability to evolve and adapt. You know, I think there's so much of that. When you start talking about great programs, you're talking about it over an extended period of time, right? Well, guess what? Over an extended period of time, the game changes. So if you have a coach that's been coaching volleyball for 30 years, well, that coach coached when it wasn't rally scoring. They coach now that it was. I mean, how much has the game of volleyball changed in 30 years, right? Yeah. So if that coach has had to evolve, they've had to adjust the way. I guarantee you they're not running the same drills at practice they ran 30 years ago because the game's changed. They've had to adjust on how they coach it. They're not running the same X's and O's. I mean, like, don't you feel like sometimes those coaches in these programs we're talking about tonight, a common thread would be the ability to adapt and the ability to make what you're doing fit the talent you have that year, the ability to say, hey, you know what? The way we're doing this maybe isn't the best way. Let's change it. Like you said, check your ego at the door a little bit and just say, hey, listen, hey, I'll admit we're not doing it as good as we can do it. So let's go ahead and make that change. So I think these programs that are successful over an extended period of time, they adjust and they adapt the way they're doing things to make sure that it fits the now, you know, to make sure it fits their team right this second.
And don't you think there's something, Matt, this is getting more into scheme and X's and O's. I guess this is going more into the game itself. But like, if I want to improve on something, I've got to be resourceful enough to know who to go talk to, where to go. Right. You know, like we talked forever. You know, if I assume if college basketball coaches for the longest time was interested in zone, they talked to Coach Boeheim at Syracuse, right? You know, it's one of those where when I watch certain programs, I'll be like, my goodness, they're good 2-strike hitters. What are they doing with their hands inside the baseball there? Or you'll see those basketball teams. And yeah, they might have different talent, different size kids or whatever. But there's certain basketball teams where they just have a really explosive first step, or man, they come off screens and shoot the basketball, or man, every post player in that program, you know, has that inside pivot where they don't waste their dribble. You know, now all of a sudden, those are the types of things that you've got to be smart enough to recognize and go figure out what they're doing and start teaching it in your program. I think that's missing way too much in leadership, Matt, is we sit around and we try to, you know, reinvent it rather than being willing to go learn it.
Yeah, I mean,
makes sense.
I can remember probably about 11 years ago now or so, making a major change in the way we approach defense, okay, in our basketball program. And you know what I did? I went and talked to a guy who I thought was the best defensive coach in our area, a guy that had a reputation for being a lockdown defensive program. And I just said to him, I said, hey, listen, you don't have to share with me if you don't want, but here's what I'm thinking, and you're the best at it. Can you help me out? And he was gracious enough to sit down with me and say, yeah, Matt, here's why we do what we do, and here's how we do it. And it changed the way we play defense. But I guess here's the thing, Shayne, when you start talking common threads, the common thread in all this is the people that run these programs, the coaches that run these programs that are great year after year after year, they have a hunger to learn. They never want to stop learning. I mean, I see it in these coaches. It amazes me how coaches that coach 30 years, in some cases, still want to learn. They want to learn all the time. They're still reading. They're still listening. They're still talking. To me, it's a common thread. I don't think you're going to find any of these programs we're talking about. And I think if you went and interviewed their coaches and say, hey, do you pretty much have it all down now? I mean, you don't really have to. I just don't think you're going to get it. Yes, they're going to be like, well, heck no, man. There's things we got to get better at. There's things we got to learn. There's things we got, because they understand as leaders of great programs or great organizations that you never stop learning. It's like, I think, was it Nike maybe that had that motto, like, what's next? It's constantly what's next. We're the best in the world at what we do, but we're just going to keep getting better and try to figure out a way to get to the next thing. Right. So it's in business too. It's in all walks of life. But what we talk about on this show, obviously, is high school sports. And it's those programs that win year after year after year. They have a hunger to learn.
Last thing, Max, I know we're running long tonight, but this is good stuff. I really think it's valuable. Last thing in my notes, literally the last phrase was figure it out. Now, don't you feel like a common thread? You eliminate the excuses. I have to really guard against this at the small school. Our enrollment's there. The facilities this. Figure it out. Figure it out with who you do have. Take the facilities you have and give them a little tender loving care and make them nicer. Do whatever it is, fundraise a little bit, do this, do that. Don't you feel like, at the end of the day, in order to reach your total success or your highest level of success in anything, the term just figure it out kind of is a great motto to go about it in terms of, don't you think championship programs figure it out when things maybe don't line up perfectly for them?
Yeah, definitely. You've heard me mention Alan Stein on this show. One of the things he always talks about is do the best you can with what you have at where you're at that moment, basically. So you just what you just said, you figure out a way to get better, even if the cards are stacked against you in a certain way or whatever. I think, again, it goes back to what we talked about earlier with just not making excuses, getting on to the next thing, handling adversity, all those things. But yeah, I definitely think you'll see that as a common thread of great programs think way more about what they have than what they don't have.
Good stuff. Again, we never share notes before, Matt, so I'll ask you anything else before I give contact information and get out of here?
No, I think we covered it. It was a neat topic.
It was
to discuss, and hopefully, the folks listening, if they have any ideas that we missed or whatever, be sure to share them. We'll put them on a follow. Maybe we'll put them on another show.
It is. I really want to thank the fans. I really appreciated some of the coaches that's reached out to us on our Why Coaches Quit. I know, Matt, that there were some people really appreciated that. It really made them stop and think, and I've really appreciated the conversation. I get 3-4 opportunities a week to just talk about some different things, and I think some future show topics are coming up. So again, your feedback's never going unnoticed. Please give it. You can do that through email at admin1@svcsportzone.com. Again, for those of you on YouTube, SVC Sports Zone. Check us out on Twitter. Check us out on Facebook. We're on Instagram. we'll always do our best to get back to you the best as possible. So make sure you subscribe to us on the YouTube channel, SVC Sports Zone Shayne. And then make sure, like I said before, get out there on your podcast app, wherever you get your podcast, and get us downloaded, and make sure that you don't miss a show every week. So Matt, a lot of fun. We'll come back with the 25th show next week. I know we have a list of 2-3 potential show topics that I think are going to be great. So we're just going to keep coming with this stuff, and I know I'm having fun, you're having fun, and I think from the feedback we're getting, it's really giving coaches a chance to really grow and look in the mirror and try to figure out some things the same way I know you and I try to do all the time. So on that note, thank you so much and appreciate it. We'll see you next week on Expanding the Zone.
The champ is here! 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 The champ is here!
Yeah. Okay, and now that everybody's present, I'm back to bringing gifts. I am everybody's present.